Okay, so I think we have started recording. Lovely. So, hello and welcome. If we haven't met, my name is Rebecca Fensom. I am the Student Wellbeing Advisor here at the Student Downing Wellbeing Service. And the session that we're doing this evening is called You Belong Here. So it's around building our self-belief and our confidence. So the reason why we wanted to do this talk this evening is because it is quite a common theme amongst students to have that bit of self-doubt and to lack in that confidence, especially academically. And sometimes there's a misconception that this can happen when you first arrive at Cambridge, but it can happen at any point, throughout your academic experience. So what I wanted to do to begin with is just have a look at some of those common behaviours that we might see in those who've got low confidence or low self-belief. We're going to then have a little look at why we might develop those feelings, how have they come about? And then we're going to look at some different ways that we can try and alter those behaviours, because if we don't, they can lead to some negative consequences for us. Okay, so the common behaviours that we see, we've got here on the screen. So when we have that low confidence, when we have that low self-belief, it can lead to us not asking for help when we need it. Because we can worry that, oh, if I ask for help, it shows that I don't really understand what it is that I'm doing. And then someone will realise that I shouldn't really be here and I'm out of place. And that can really really stifle us in so many ways, because it is totally fine to ask for help, and sometimes it's really useful to ask for help. But if we have these behaviours, these feelings that we're not good enough, then that can stop us doing that. It can also lead to us really seeking perfection, and this is something that we do find, this perfectionist trait within a lot of students as well. And sometimes, because we don't believe that what we have will be good enough, we have to make it completely perfect. And what that can lead to, the negative consequences, is that it can lead to late submission of work, because we don't feel comfortable submitting it until it's perfect. Yeah? So that can sometimes have an impact in that, leading to those really agonizing over those small details, because it might just be this one thing that shows people that I don't belong here, that I'm not good enough. The common behaviour as well, really beating yourself up when you make a mistake. And that is something that sometimes, with this perfectionism, we can really struggle with. But we're going to make mistakes. We can't be perfect all of the time. If we knew everything already, we wouldn't be here, right? We're here to learn, and we often learn through mistakes. So we're going to be looking at that a little bit later on as well. That constantly seeking validation as well. Maybe we are constantly having to know, are we doing okay? Is this right? What do you think of this? Do you think I'm on the right track, or how is that? Rather than trusting our own intuition, looking outwards rather than inwards. The overworking is definitely a common behaviour, that we see here at Cambridge. But when it's overworking to prove your worth, because your worth is very tied up in your academic success, that can often lead to the feeling that you don't really belong here. And then when you do achieve, something, we can kind of dismiss or downplay it. Oh, well, everybody got that. Well, everybody passed it. It doesn't really matter. But that can often mean that we don't really have that self-belief in ourselves. We judge our success on our abilities rather than our efforts. So with people who, have a strong self-belief and have a good level of confidence, they might think, oh, okay, well, I didn't get the best mark, but I really tried hard on that, so I'm really proud of myself. Whereas someone who maybe have a lower confidence and a lower self-belief, they might think, well, I didn't get the best mark, so it's completely irrelevant what I did, how much effort I put in. So you might look at this list and you might think, yep, yep, I tick all of that. And it is very much a spectrum. We sit on, this in different times and in different places. And we can alter on where we sit on that spectrum as well. So it's not it's not another thing to beat yourself up about. It happens to us at different stages, of our life. And this is why what we want to do today is really look at understanding what those behaviours are so that we have some self-awareness about it. And when we start to recognise some of those behaviours, the things that we can put in place just to stop them having any of those negative consequences. Okay, so what we are talking about here, what a lot of those behaviours are exhibiting is what we would call imposter syndrome as well. When we have that lack of belief, when we feel like we don't belong somewhere, that is kind of classified often as imposter syndrome. And this is what the quote here is: a psychological phenomena in which people doubt their accomplishments, having instead persistent feelings of intellectual inadequacy and fear of being exposed as a fraud, despite evident successes or external proof of competence. And again, this is something that is often very common for people, very often, when they first arrived at Cambridge, because no doubt in your previous education establishments, you have been kind of at the top of the list. And then you come with lots of other people who have also been at top of the list. So it's like that pool gets a lot smaller, and you think, oh God, I thought I was really clever, but I'm nothing compared to this person, or gosh, they're so intelligent, like I can never think of anything like that. And it can start to develop these feelings of imposter syndrome. Well, oh my gosh, well, I'm not as clever as them. Like, do I really belong here? Will I get good grades? How will I get on? And it can lead to those feelings and those thoughts. So how do we develop these feelings, and sometimes it's not something that is often just, clicks in overnight. There can be lots of different influences that mean that we develop these types of behaviors and these types of thinking patterns. So this is not to blame, any of these, or to kind of point the finger. Sometimes it's just useful to understand, what has happened to us in our past, what the blueprints were for us, so that we can understand our behaviors now. So sometimes the parenting styles, that we've had, maybe the cultural influences, maybe if we, got 96 out of 100 on a test, if the parenting style was, oh, well, that's great, but what a shame about those 4 points. Let's try and get those 4 points, let's try and, do that next time. Or the cultural influences, which can be quite competitive in terms of academic success. The environments in your education, in your peer groups, if there is a lot of competition, between you, then, or a very competitive educational setting, that can develop imposter syndrome as well, because again, that's where our sense of self-worth gets tied up with our achievements, so we are only as good as our most recent academic achievement, for example. A lack of diversity in settings as well. Often that imposter syndrome is that we look around and we don't see anybody like us. We may be, of a different ethnicity, a different race, and we look around and everyone is different to us. And that can really make us feel out of place. So again, it is that feeling of, do I really belong here? And this is why, so many companies, the university as a whole is really striving to increase that diversity, because there's so much learning, from diversity, in the way that we do things here as well. Okay, let me click on to the next one. So problems that some of these behaviours can lead to, this idea of imposter syndrome, what happens? So we don't share our ideas, because if we don't have that self-belief or that confidence in what we are, what we do and how we are, if we feel like we don't really belong, or someone else is going to be better than us, we think, oh, well, I'm not going to share my idea in case it's a bit rubbish, or if somebody says, oh, well, actually, that's wrong, then they're going to think, oh, she put forward a really bad idea, she doesn't belong here, so it can really lead to that stifling in our creativity in a lot of ways too. And some of our amazing ideas, that we might have, if we don't have the confidence to say them, then they just disappear. It can also mean that we don't push ourselves out of our comfort zone. We only do what we know we can achieve, because the fear of failure is so big that we don't put ourselves in situations where we might possibly fail. That real procrastination and poor time management, as well, because everything has to be perfect, everything has to be just so to present that I am good enough, to be here. that being unable to switch off, which leads to really high levels of stress. You know, if we're constantly on the go or constantly thinking, constantly worrying, we're going to burn out. You know, and the Cambridge term is very tight. You know, it can be very intense here. You know, and if we don't have those sometimes, if we don't allow ourselves that, you know, then it can lead to real issues in our physical and mental health. I'm really dreading that evaluation. So often what we find, especially around exam periods, which again are stressful, you know, as they are anyway, if we have these feelings of imposter syndrome, or if we have that doubt in our confidence and our self-belief, it's like everything comes to head in this exam. If I don't do well in this, then they'll definitely see and I'll get kicked out, and that's it. My life is absolutely over. So these are all the problems if we, you know, don't challenge those thinking patterns, don't challenge those thoughts. You know, it can really stifle our academic achievement, you know, in a lot of ways, because we don't push ourselves, we don't share our ideas, we don't embrace that creativity, you know, that we bring, because we're constantly worried what other people might think. You know, so really challenging these things means that we can really fulfill our potential here. Okay, so if you are finding yourself, you're thinking, yep, okay, I have a real fear of failure. Yep, I procrastinate, you know, quite a lot. Or yeah, I often have feelings like I don't really belong here. Then you are in very good company, okay? Because so many people, and we're going to look at a stat in a few moments around the percentage of people who experience feelings. It is incredibly high. And no matter on the level of success you seem to have, it seems to impact you even then. So here's a quote from Maya Angelou. Okay, so one of the greatest writers, really influential and inspirational to so many people. And this is a quote from her. I've run a game on everybody and they're going to find me out. You know, she often felt like she didn't really belong. What was her voice, you know, compared to other great writers? You know, who was she, you know, to say these things? But can you imagine a world without the voice of Maya Angelou? You know, how important she's been to so many people. And I just, again, we think if those feelings had stopped her doing what she was doing, what the world, you know, would miss out on. And then another example here as well, Albert Einstein, you know, what we think of one of the smartest people in our recent history, you know, and he said, I'm an involuntary swindler. You know, he felt that he was just pulling the wool over people's eyes, that they thought he was intelligent. He's like, well, I'm not intelligent. You know, I don't know, you know, what I'm doing. So again, we can see at all levels of excellence and brilliance. You know, people experience these feelings and people have these thoughts and behaviors. So we've got a bit of research here from Dr. Pauline Rosecrans. So she, you know, wrote a paper around the imposter phenomenon. And what they said is, you know, it impacts people across genders, across race, age, and areas of working. So it's not limited to certain groups of people, you know, regardless of what, you know, background you have, regardless of what your circumstances are in life. These feelings of not belonging, you know, not being good enough, this imposter syndrome, can impact absolutely everybody, you know, so it's a real common human trait, you know, that we can experience. But the big message here, obviously, is the title of this talk. You do belong here, okay? And we're going to start looking at the way that we can challenge those negative thinking patterns to really help you start thinking, you know, that you do, to start believing in yourself a little bit. Okay, so we've got a bit of evidence here. It's called pluralistic ignorance. Okay, so this is the statistic that we were talking about. So 82% of people experience feelings of imposter syndrome. Okay, so that's a really high percentage, isn't it? You know, it is a lot of people, you know, experience that. You know, it's not just, you know, 2% or 5%. So a lot of people do experience it. You know, but the issue, you know, that we often have is that people don't talk to each other about it. You know, but what the research we have here from Gardner and Allen 2019 is actually that talking to people about those feelings can really help overcome them, because what you will realize, you know, as we can see here with this statistic, lots of people experience the same. And sometimes we find that, you know, when we realize that we're not alone in our feelings, that other people have that as well. It almost validates ourselves, and we realize, oh, I'm not strange, I'm not odd, for feeling this way. Other people feel it too. And especially with something like imposter syndrome or lack of confidence, sometimes when we look at other people and we think, oh, they've got it all together, like they're so confident, like they're so brilliant, and when they say, oh gosh, I really was intimidated, by that person and how clever they are, or gosh, I really didn't know what I was doing and I just kind of, guessed the answer, we can be like, oh my gosh, they experience it too. Like it's not just me, that have that. And what this research, said that sometimes speaking to people, outside of that circle, where that situation where those imposter feelings come up, so maybe within your academic life, sometimes talking to people in that can feel a bit too vulnerable, maybe a bit too scary, because we don't want to expose ourselves. But getting support, outside of, that area, that little bubble, including your family and friends, is actually more effective. Because those people will be like, what? Like, no, you're amazing. Like, you've done really well. Or, oh, I don't think that. Or, gosh, yeah, no, I felt this in this situation too. So it's really, really important to talk, about that. And remember that we are here in the wellbeing team as well, to support you with that as well. Okay, so a little bit of a link here between self-esteem and imposter syndrome, and that's why we wanted to talk a little bit about self-belief, and those feelings. So, some different bits of research here that shows that people with low self-esteem are more susceptible to imposter syndrome. And low self-esteem has a high correlation to perfectionism and imposter feelings. So when we don't feel good about ourselves, when we don't have a good opinion of ourselves, if we perhaps don't particularly like who we are and how we are, that can mean that we develop, these feelings a lot more. And how I often think of it is if we don't have a good opinion of ourselves, we can look outwards for that validation of who we are. But if we have that strong kind of belief in ourselves, obviously we're going to take in opinions from other people, but we have that strong inside, that we know that we're good enough, we know that we're okay. But if we're constantly looking outwards to validate our worth, to validate our existence, then that becomes a lot more precarious, because it's so susceptible to what other people believe and what other people think, rather than a grounding, within ourselves. So we've got just a few questions here. This is a therapeutic scale. There's normally 10 questions, and that's quite a lot to do, within one workshop. So just have a little look at these questions, and maybe just make a little note, of your marks, and then we'll have a little look. Just to sometimes have a look at how our self-esteem is, because it's not often a question that we ask ourselves. What do I think of myself? What is my self-esteem like? Because again, we can get so caught up in these thinking patterns that we don't actually realize that that's perhaps not a good way to think about ourselves. So I'll read through, these questions and just maybe make a note of what you would say in answer to these statements. Okay, so on the whole, I am satisfied with myself. So if you strongly agree with that statement, you put 4 points. If you agree with that statement, then 3. If you disagree, it's 2. And if you strongly disagree, it's 1. Okay. So the second one is, at times, I think I am no good at all. So if you strongly agree, then it's 1 point. If you agree, it's 2. Disagree is 3. And strongly disagree, it's 4. Okay, the next one is, I feel that I have a number of good qualities. So if you strongly agree, it's 4. If you agree, it's 3. If you disagree, it's 2. If you strongly disagree, it's 1. And then the fourth one, I feel that I do not have much to be proud of. If you strongly agree, it's 1. If you agree, it's 2. If you disagree, it's 3. If you strongly disagree, it's 4. And then the final question, I am able to do things as well as most other people. If you strongly agree, it's 4. If you agree, it's 3. If you disagree, it's 2. If you strongly disagree, it's 1. Okay. So have a little jot up of your points of how much you score altogether. And then have a think, what did you score? So the higher score indicates a good self-esteem. So anything around 15 up, you've got that good kind of self-esteem there. A lower score, so those lower points there, maybe kind of 10 or below, indicates a poor self-esteem. If you're somewhere in the middle, then, maybe it can fluctuate a little bit, but maybe there's a little bit of work to do there in improving your self-esteem. And if it's very low, then that can be an indication really maybe about your susceptibility to imposter syndrome, or how it might explain how things often feel in your life in that way. So this is only kind of part of the scale. Obviously this is just a exercise in a workshop. So if you were worried about anything in that, or you're not quite sure, or you want to do maybe the full kind of diagnostic kind of scale thing, then please do get in touch and we can have a chat about that. But this is just a bit of a guide, just to say, okay, well, what do I think about myself? How do I feel in my own skin? Okay, so if we are struggling with our self-esteem, and this means that we're more susceptible to these feelings of imposter syndrome, if that then means that we can have some of these negative side effects, we can limit the success that we can have, then it makes sense, okay, well, let's build our self-esteem. If a stronger self-esteem means that we will not experience these feelings as much, then this is what we kind of need to do. So challenging the negative self-talk, and again, sometimes we don't realize how badly we speak to ourselves, and if you were with a couple of friends and one friend started saying to the other one, like, oh God, you were rubbish in that that meeting, that piece of work that you did this week, that was just awful, who do you think you are, like, you're so stupid. We'd be like, hold on, don't speak to them like that, like, that's really out of order, you can't say things like that, that's so mean. But somehow we accept those nasty words to ourselves and don't kind of challenge it. So we almost need to be our own best friend, kind of stick up for ourselves and be like, excuse me, I'm not taking that. That's, thank you for your input, but that's not the whole story, or I'm not going to be doing that. And this is something for me personally, a bit of self-disclosure. I made this a New Year's resolution one year because I started to become aware of how negatively I was speaking to myself, and I thought, gosh, I'm just so mean, to myself. Why am I talking, in this way? So I made it a New Year's resolution to stop that negative self-talk, or every time it came up, just be like, I'm not listening to that, and over, by March, I would say it kind of went, and it doesn't really happen so much now. So sometimes once we start changing that channel a little bit, then that it becomes a little easier. So celebrating your wins, as well. Again, sometimes in the British culture, that we have here, we don't want to seem like we're being big-headed, or showing off, or blowing our own trumpet. And it's not about being boastful and saying, oh, look how fabulous I am. Look how amazingly I did, in my last exam. It's not that. It's more just about in yourself, saying, oh, I did a good job with that. Or do you know what? I didn't perhaps get the mark I wanted, but I tried so hard. I'm really proud of the effort, that I put in. And track and measure your success, as well. Start making a note of it, of every time you do something well, and it will start to, challenge that negative, thinking pattern. Visualization, as well, is a really good technique to use. A lot of athletes, use this in terms of, if they have a big competition or something like that come up, they'll visualize themselves winning in it. And sometimes if we visualize ourselves doing something really well, then that can, just help it change again that negative thinking pattern. And well, I don't know, I'm not going to do very well. You think, oh, I could do well here. I could be okay. Grow your strengths is very much part of the positive psychology movement, which is rather than focusing on when things go wrong, it's trying to build us up to make us stronger. So with the positive psychology movement, they say instead of focusing on the things that you don't do so well and trying to get better at them, focus on the things that you do well and try and make them even better, because we're already good at it, so we're already going to start building that. So what, with that, we can do, so say, for example, you're a really fast reader, start, just reading kind of more books, or if you're a really good public speaker, start doing that. If you're someone who's just really kind and thoughtful, just start doing more kind and thoughtful things, in that way. The high five habit, was really popularized recently by Mel Robbins, who you may have heard of. She's like an American motivational speaker. So this is basically, because the symbol of the high five is when you've done something well. So it's just that thing of giving ourselves a high five. So each morning, in the mirror, while we're brushing our teeth or something, it's just placing your hand on the mirror and just saying you're doing all right, or some kind of positive affirmation. And again, it just sets off those neural pathways in the brain. Even though you're doing it to yourself, it still sets off those same neural pathways that we're doing okay. Mindfulness as well is a really good technique to be able to develop for our general well-being, but in building our self-esteem, because it's all about tuning into our inner world. And often with low self-esteem, we've lost connection with that. We don't believe in ourselves. We're constantly looking outside for that validation. And mindfulness is all about, tuning into what's inside, so developing a regular mindfulness practice can be really helpful. And self-compassion as well, that comes in with a negative self-talk. So if something doesn't go so well, it's not about beating yourself up about it. It's knowing, well, I didn't do it so well this time, I'll try better next. Okay. So grounding as well. So again, this can be really helpful. Grounding can be really good to do when those negative thinking spirals really start to get out of control. And if it really starts, so if we're in a meeting, we want to present a really good idea, but we start thinking, well, what if it's wrong? What if you mess up? What if they realize that you don't know what you're talking about? We can just ground back down, and it just helps us take that step back and notice those negative thinking spirals. So grounding through your senses, so just thinking, okay, well, what can I see right now? What are the sounds I can hear? Grounding for your physical body, so noticing maybe the points of contact of your back against a chair, maybe your feet against the floor. Counting backwards from 100. This is a really good one to do if you can't sleep, if these negative thinking habits are preventing you sleeping. Counting backwards from 100 is really helpful. And the alphabet challenge as well, again, these are just things that it's like an interrupter to that thinking pattern. So the alphabet challenge is where you go through the alphabet, and for each letter you have to find a word, so you could maybe do it on animals. Okay, so A for alpaca, B for bear, C for cat, D for dog, E for elephant, F for fox. So again, it just interrupts that negative spiral, from going down. Okay, so a really good way to challenge these feelings of not being good enough, not belonging, that real perfectionism, is just to get more comfortable with failing. And again, this is something that is a really common experience for students here, because you are incredibly intelligent, people, you have achieved such academic success that you probably don't have a lot of experience of failure. So again, we can start to fear what we don't know, because ultimately, if we fail, the world doesn't implode. We don't, kind of drop dead on the spot. Life goes on and we're okay. And, really lovely quote here from Bill Gates, it's fine to celebrate success, but it is more important to heed the lessons of failure. And sometimes we can learn so much from our mistakes, you know, so much from times when we haven't done something well. You know, there's so much growth and learning from that if we can lean into it. And again, unfortunately, in our society and our culture, you know, there's very much this cancel culture. No one can make a mistake. You know, if you do that, you know, you're out. You know, that can really, you know, feed into that fear of failure with us. But everybody's going to fail at some point. But it is such a rich learning experience. Okay, so I've got a video which hopefully is going to play. Okay, so let's have a go at this. So this is Jay Shetty, that you may have heard of. He was previously a Buddhist monk, and now kind of, you know, tries to talk a lot about how can we find that happiness, why we can do things. And this is a really short talk from him just around failure.
I need to tell you something. It's about my mull of rice. I want
We'll
it.
just have to wait for the ad to play first.
Oh, nonsense! The microwave is for soup or drying socks. I want mine.
This has nothing to do with the talk, obviously.
Muller, love every bit.
Means that we're actually letting go of all of that which we could be learning at every single point. Since I was a young boy, I've been enamored with stories of failure, from biographies and autobiographies and books about people who changed the world and books about people who changed other people's worlds. There was a young cartoonist, and all the editors and newspaper journalists said that he lacked natural talent. They rejected him, and after countless rejections, it was actually a church minister who gave him an opening to start drawing little cartoons in the back of the church in this small little shed. And this gentleman, he once saw a mouse running around, and believe it or not, that was the birth of Mickey Mouse. That was Walt Disney, that cartoonist who went on to win 22 Academy Awards. Imagine this lady was told that she wasn't fit for television. She was told that she would never make it online or on TV. Her name's Oprah Winfrey. She became the most influential woman in the world. This has to be my favorite failure story of all time. I mean, his fiance died. He failed in business. He had a nervous breakdown. And on top of all of that, he failed and lost in 8 elections. He went on to be the 16th president of the United States of America. His name's Abraham Lincoln. I actually believe that failure has the ability to lure success. Countless failures are almost doorkeepers to success, and every time you walk through one door, the gate gets bigger and the lock gets tighter, and it gets that much more difficult because we're being tested for our genuineness and our authenticity and our real desire to chase that goal, a real desire to actually embody the values that are needed to almost take responsibility for that success, to take responsibility for that position and the influence it brings with it. And therefore, if you've never failed, you've never really tried anything new.
All right, I'll pause it there before we go into the Let It Go mashup from YouTube. Okay, so that's really, again, thinking about changing our perception of failure, because sometimes that fear of being found out, that fear of failure, it feeds that imposter syndrome. It feeds that lack of confidence, just like oxygen kind of feeds the fire. But if we can take away that fear of it, if I say something and it's wrong, and someone says, well, you don't really belong here, and then I get kicked out, and then what happens? Sometimes it's really because we think everything will be a disaster, the world will end, but we will go on living, like we will be okay. And actually that is such an extreme circumstance when presenting one idea that someone says, get out, like you don't belong here. So sometimes we really have to challenge that catastrophizing that we can sometimes, experience. So you do belong here. Okay, if you are experiencing those feelings, know that you will not be alone in that. As we saw from that statistics, 82% of people, that's a lot of people, experience that, but we just don't talk about it because it's part of the condition almost. We don't want to admit that we don't feel we belong here, because then someone might say, yeah, you don't belong here, so it's really, how it can kind of grow and develop in that way. So ways to try and challenge that, if you recognize some of those behaviors, you know, in yourself, really start with your self-esteem. So many things really do start from believing, you know, in ourselves and growing our self-esteem. And I always think if we can feel a little bit happier in ourselves, and everything just kind of falls into place, you know, around us. It can improve our relationships, it can improve our academic success, it can improve, you know, our options for the future. When you start to notice those negative thinking loops, you know, that spiraling, you know, really ground, you know, use some of those techniques to really interrupt them, you know, and stop them and challenging each other. Talk to each other, you know, be honest about how you're feeling. Come and talk to us, you know, in the wellbeing team. Talk to your family, talk to your friends, because again, it seems to grow in that isolation. And change your perception on failure. You know, take away that fear. You know, if you fail, well, what could you learn from that? You know, what an amazing growth opportunity, you know, that could be. Okay, so if you would like any further support, if you want to make a one-to-one, if anything is kind of being stirred up for you from you know, this session, then please do get in touch. You know, please do contact me. You are not taking up my time from anybody else. You know, sometimes that can stop us when we go, oh, other people have more important problems than me. No, I've got time. Okay, we can always find a time, you know, to meet and have a chat about this, and I can always signpost you on to further things as well. So please don't be afraid, you know, to get in touch. And I just wanted to, you know, end, you know, with this quote. And this was a quote that a student I spoke to gave to me this week, actually. And I think, again, it just is that reminder that we are all smart here. Okay, the reason that you're here is because you're clever. Okay, so you don't need to prove yourself. You know, so distinguish yourself in other ways. Okay, because you've already proved you're good enough to be here just by getting here. Okay, and the quote here says, distinguish yourself by being kind. And I would really encourage you to be kind to yourself, you know, in that way. Okay, so we've come to the end. I will stop the recording now, but again, if you're watching this on the recording and you want to have a chat further, please do email me, and it would be great to see you. So thank you very much. I'm just going to stop the recording now. There we go. Thank you.